Hello, my people, and welcome back to our next video lecture. We will be talking about vision in this lecture, and then in our next lecture video, we'll be talking about hearing. And it is moving on from our sensation and perception subject for the day. So we have vision, right? And so what vision is when our eyes transduce, or another synonym for transduce is transform light energy to neural signals. Okay, so eyes transduce light energy into neural signals. And on top of using transduced or transform, I like to say translate. And we will see why in just a little bit, but put that next to your notes. And this represents objects in the environment in terms of shape, size, color, and location. Our vision can see it, right? Our eyes can see it. And kind of thinking about what we see, right? So going to like the biological steps of it, we have wavelength and hue. So hue is the color, so a dimension of color determined by the wavelength of light that is showing. And a wavelength is the distance from the peak of one wave to the peak of a next, right? So if you notice, as you look at this, the larger waves of red at the top, and then there's tighter waves at the bottom, and that is how we are portrayed with color, right? So in a little bit more into this is that short wavelengths tend to be bluish colors, right? So here's the wavelength. Greater amplitudes, right? Height, which means brighter colors. Longer wavelength is for reddish colors, and smaller amplitude is for dull colors, okay? And when we talk about, intensity and brightness, intensity is the amount of energy in a wavelength that is determined by its amplitude, which is its height, relative to its brightness. So amplitude is how high each of the waves are. And this video, again, just was going to show you kind of how the wavelengths are. You don't have to, we're not going to click on it. But again, amplitude is the height of each wave. So amplitude is right here, my people, and wavelength is right here, okay? All right, so now we are going to get into the eyeball. So in your notes, make sure you have a little squiggle mark, and this is all about our eye, okay? And there's a lot of stuff going on, so let's talk about the eye and how the eye works. All right, so first, if you guys can, pause the video right now, and if you can, just kind of draw this eye. You do not need to write the middle part. You don't need to know that, and you don't need to know the sclera or the choroid, okay? So just ignore those three. I was trying to have the best image that I can for this. And so if you could, please, in your notes, make an eyeball and label them. And I'll be going over what each of them do, along with the process of how we translate neural messages in our eye. Okay, so we have, let me go back a little. I didn't mean to give that much out. So we have the cornea, which is the outer layer of our eye. So the cornea is, so if you've ever had a scratch cornea, it's because you can actually scratch your cornea. It's just the top layer of your eye, okay? So the cornea is the outer layer of your eye. It's outer layer covering, okay? The pupil has a hole that allows light to enter in. So your pupil is what dilates. It's the blackness in your eye. Boop. I don't know if you guys can see this. So you have your pupil, and then the iris is what color eye you have. So the iris is the muscle that controls how much light enters, but it also is the coloring of your eye. So your iris, my iris is hazel. So this is where we get our eye color from, okay? We then have our lens, which is, our lens is right here, and it focuses the light that's coming in, and it's going to focus in for our retina, which our retina is on the back end of our eye, okay? The retina is in the back end of our eye. It contains all visual sensory receptors, okay? And this is where the central focus is right around here, and it contains most of the eye's cones and rods, which we'll talk about what they are in just a minute. And then the optic nerve. So the optic nerve is right here. So the optic nerve is essentially the gateway into the neural impulse going up to our spine. So essentially this optic nerve is the last spot of where the neural impulses are being translated, which I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the optic nerve is probably the most important part of your eye, and it takes messages to the brain. Okay, so the optic nerve is what's going to connect to the nervous system, okay? All right, so let's go through each of these steps one by one. So right now you should have already drawn your eye, and let's go through each stage of how light is transformed into neural images. So instead of maybe saying transformed or transduced, I always like to say it's the translator, because when we talk about the eye and the ear, there is one vocab within the eye and the ear that are the translators. Because remember, our spines only understand neural impulses. So how do we get from what we're seeing from the light into neural impulses, okay? So the light enters the eye through the cornea and passes through the pupil. Okay, so these are all steps of how we turn what we're seeing into neural impulses. Step 2 is the iris, the colored muscle that adjusts the opening in which the light enters the eye, and it focuses in, and the light goes back onto the retina. So the retina, again, is in the back of your eye, and after the light passes through your cornea, the pupils and the lens, the light falls upon the activating the rods and the cones. So in your retina, so in the back, so if we look, maybe if we go back, in the retina, in this little back area, are things that are called rods and cones, okay? Rods and cones. And rods and cones are how we see color and how we see black and white, which will be explained in the next slide. So after it activates the rods and cones in the back of your eye, the signal from the rods and cones are received by the bipolar cells, which are transmitted into the ganglion cells. So bipolar cells are within your eye, and the ganglion cells are what makes up the optic nerve. So the optic nerve, let's go back real quick. I know this is kind of a lot to explain. Let me go back. So this optic nerve is made up of ganglion cells, and this optic nerve is the translator. So please, in your notes, write that the optic nerve is the translator of light energy to neural impulses. Your optic nerve in the back of your eye translates what the light energy is seeing coming in, and it translates to neural impulses to send up to your spine. Because remember, or send up to your brain. Because remember, our spine only speaks neural impulses. So our eyes, what we're seeing, has to be translated in order for our brain to understand what we're seeing. Okay? All right. So within the retina, what we talked about, we have rods and cones. And they serve two very important reasons. Rods, they help us see black and white, not colors. So rods are necessary for when we're driving during dusk or in the dark. So when people talk about their night vision, right? Usually night vision tends to go first when we get older. So a lot of older people, their rods start to I don't want to say shrivel, but they start to weaken. And that's why a lot of old people don't like to drive at nighttime, because they can't see as well. I know I have really bad rods. My rods are not the best. I have a hard time seeing at nighttime as well. And then we have cones, and cones are for color. Cones for color. Cones are how we see color. Rods are how we see black and white. So cones are how we see color, and they're in the retina, and they function in bright or daylight, and enables to see color perception. So again, cones for color, rods are for black and white. And so remember from our last chapter, our hemispheres, the way that we see, right? So our left side of our brain controls the right side of our body. The right side of our body controls the left side of or the right side of our brain controls the left side of our body. So the visual pathway. So objects in our right visual field is stimulated by our left side of our retinas. So I know, like, why do we have to be so complicated? It's essentially like our brains are split. So again, if we look at this, our left side of our brain controls what we see on the right, and then our right side of the brain controls what we see on the left. So again, I can't explain why our brain does this, but that's how it works. Objects in our left side of the field are stimulated by the right side of our retinas. Again, the axons of the ganglion cells make up the optic nerve. And again, the optic nerve is right here, and then it translates to our brain. So again, info from the left visual field is seen through our right side, and then our right side, so our right eye is controlled by our left side of our brain. So interesting facts, my people, interesting facts. All right, so within our brain, we have something that is called feature detection. And usually my chair, okay, so this chair is supposed to go away. I'm sorry that the chair is getting in your way. I don't know why it's doing that. But essentially, what you need to know about this, you don't need to write about Hubble and Wiesel, but I do want you to write that feature detector cells pass in info onto our supercell in the cortex. So in parts of our brain, we have certain areas that are made for us to recognize certain things. So a big portion of our brain is, again, you would see it, but I don't know why this chair is in the way. But faces, the ability to recognize faces is a part of our brain, and it has a certain spot to it, along with recognizing houses, certain parts of objects, right? So we do have supercell areas that specialize in certain stimuli. So again, we have a big portion of our brain that is just for recognizing faces, right? So these feature detection areas in our brain just allow us to have certain areas in our brain that are for certain stimuli too. And that's why in the first video, if you saw faces in the rocks, there is a part of our brain that allows us to be able to recognize faces, right? So we are also able to parallel process. So with our vision, we're able to all at the same time see color, movement, form, depth, all at the same time. We know that this bird is flying away. We can see the colors while the bird is flying away. We can process multiple things at a time. And then let me get my camera out of this last one. So the brain integrates the separate parallel dimensions of visual info interpreted in different areas. So again, parallel processing, again, we are able to do a bunch of things at once. So parallel, we can do things at the same time, right? We can observe and see things and see the color, movement, and form of something all at the same time. So this is going to lead us to our theories of color vision. I know this is where we would have the fun time to see who's colorblind in class and all that. Fun fact, usually one in every 3 men are colorblind, and then 1 in every 8 women are colorblind. So men are most likely to be colorblind, especially when it comes to reds and purples. But we do have Young Helmholtz, his trichromatic theory. And I always remember this as saying tri because it's 3 colors. And based on this behavioral experiment, Helmholtz suggested that the retina contains 3 receptors, so 3 types of cones. We have red, blue, and green, right? And if we think about these, they're kind of like our primary colors, right? So if we mix, red and blue together, we're going to get purple, right? So again, when different cones are stimulated, they create different colors, right? Just very similar to how we paint, right? By adding and mixing colors. And then we have color deficiency, so color blindness. So what I would do is, if you guys can, look at this circle, and if there is a number within this circle, and if you can't see the number, you may be colorblind in certain aspects of your cones. So if you can't see it, it does say 74. It is in green. So the genetic disorder, which prevents individuals from discriminating between certain colors due to a weakness or a lack of certain cones, right? So if your green cones in your eyes are not processing, it's going to lead to color blindness in certain areas for you, right? Most common form of color blindness is difficulty distinguishing between red and green. That tends to be the most common. And then another theory for color vision is opponent processing theory, which is Herring, which is the one who came up with the theory, proposed that we process 4 primary colors opposed in pairs of red, green, blue, yellow, and black and white. So again, these are just theories. These are 2 ways of looking at how we process color. So the opponent processing theory, they thought that, the blue and the yellow work together, green and red work together, and white and black work together in pairs. And again, a lot of people tend to be colorblind when it comes to distinguishing the purples, reds, and greens. And last but not least, this is how I usually end the class day for learning about seeing. I know, so if you want to try this, you can. So I'll take my camera out of the screen. What you're supposed to do is stare, so in a dark room, stare at the white dot for 30 seconds. And then what you're going to do is you're going to immediately look away from what is being stimulated in this dark room. And what you should see is the American flag in red, white, and blue, because these are their opposite colors. So what it does is when you look away from the screen, your other receptors should be on, and you'll see the American flag. So let me know if you try it. Let me know if it works. I look forward to seeing if you guys tried it, and stay tuned for the hearing PowerPoint.